I held the small plastic rectangle between my fingers, turning it over. Room 7. The key card felt heavier than it should. You don't have to do this, Graham said from the driver's seat. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I watched pine trees blur past the window. We'd been climbing for an hour, the road growing narrower with each turn. You arranged everything, I said, echoing his words from 3 days ago. I can call it off. The steam bath sat nestled against the mountainside like something from another century. Stone walls, copper fixtures, green with age, a place where wealthy miners once came to wash away the mountain's dust. Now it was ours for the night. I stepped out into the cold air. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled my lungs. Graham's hand found mine, fingers interlacing. 5 men, I said. Not a question. 5 men who understand discretion, who understand boundaries. I looked at him then, really looked. 15 years of marriage, and I was still discovering the depths of his psychology. His fascination with desire and trust had always been theoretical, until now. The main building loomed before us, windows glowing amber in the dusk. I could hear water running somewhere inside, the old pipes singing their mountain song. What if I can't? I asked. Graham squeezed my hand. Then we leave. But Amelia. He paused, searching for words. What if you can? The heat hit me the moment I stepped inside, thick herbal steam that made my skin flush immediately. I shed my coat, then my sweater, moving through the ritual of undressing as if in a dream. The main chamber opened before me like a cathedral. Stone arches, pools of mineral water, and the constant whisper of steam. 5 men waited in the shadows, their faces obscured by the mist. One stepped forward, tall, dark-haired, maybe 40. He didn't speak, only extended his hand toward my wrist. His touch was gentle, questioning. I turned toward the corner where Graham stood, a glass of red liquid catching the amber light. Our eyes met through the haze. He raised the glass slightly and nodded. The permission I hadn't known I was waiting for. What followed belonged to the steam and shadows, hands that knew their purpose, whispers and languages I didn't recognize, the slide of wet skin against wet stone. I closed my eyes and let myself fall into sensation, into the heat that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Time moved differently here. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps hours compressed into heartbeats. I lost track of individual touches, individual faces. There was only the warmth, the weight of bodies, the sound of my own breathing echoing off ancient stone. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone with the steam. I found myself staring at the polished copper surface mounted on the far wall, my reflection wavering in the steam. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow. Flushed, yes, but also awakened. My skin still tingled where hands had been. I traced the sensation with my fingertips, remembering. 5 men whose names I'd never learned, whose faces I could barely recall through the mist. Yet they'd touched something deeper than skin. Graham appeared behind me in the reflection, fully clothed, while I remained wrapped only in the chamber's heat. How do you feel? He asked. I studied our reflected images, distorted and dreamlike. Alive, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. More alive than I've felt in years. He moved closer, his hand settling on my shoulder. Through the copper surface, I watched his face, searching for judgment or regret. Instead, I found something that looked like wonder. I thought I might be jealous, he admitted, watching you with them. And I wasn't. I was proud. You were magnificent. The word hung between us in the steamy air. Magnificent. Not guilty, not ashamed. Magnificent. I leaned back against him, feeling the rough fabric of his shirt against my bare shoulders. What does that make us? Honest, he said, finally honest about who we are. We drove down the mountain in silence, the heated aftermath of the chamber slowly fading from my skin. Graham's hands were steady on the wheel now, no longer white-knuckled with tension. I pressed my face to the cool window and watched the forest give way to foothills, then to the familiar suburbs of home. The ordinary world rushed back to meet us, streetlights and stop signs, and the mundane geometry of our regular life. Do you regret it? Graham asked as we pulled into our driveway. I considered the question seriously. The physical memory of those hands, those whispered encouragements still pulsed through me. But underneath that, something deeper had shifted. A door had opened that I hadn't even known existed. No, I said. Do you? He turned off the engine and sat in the sudden quiet of our couch. Through the thin wall, I could hear our neighbor's television, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I regret waiting so long, Graham said finally. I regret all the years we spent pretending we were something we weren't. I reached across the console and took his hand. His wedding ring caught the garage light, solid and familiar. 15 years of marriage, and tonight we discovered we were still strangers to ourselves. What are we now? I asked. I don't know, he said. But we're something new. Inside our house, everything looked the same. The kitchen table where we'd had breakfast that morning, the couch where we watched the news each night, the photographs on the mantel documenting 15 years of conventional happiness. I set my purse on the counter, and the small plastic rectangle tumbled out onto the granite surface. Room 7, such a simple thing to have unlocked so much. We should talk about boundaries, Graham said, filling the kettle with water. About what this means going forward. I nodded, though part of me wanted to resist the urge to analyze, to categorize what had happened. Some experiences were meant to exist in the space between words. I don't want to share you again, I said, the truth surprising me. Not like that, not with others. He turned from the stove, eyebrows raised. But I'm glad we did it once. I'm glad I know what it feels like to be wanted by strangers, to be desired without history or context or expectation. The kettle began to whistle, and Graham poured hot water over chamomile tea bags. The domestic ritual felt strange after the primal heat of the steam chamber. I learned something about myself tonight, I continued, about my capacity for pleasure, about my willingness to be vulnerable. Graham handed me a mug and our fingers brushed. Such a simple touch, yet it carried the weight of everything we'd discovered. You've become stronger, he said, echoing something he'd told me in the chamber. Now you know yourself. We sat at our kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs like a gentler echo of the mountain chamber. Graham reached across the wood surface and traced the rim of my cup with one finger. I need you to understand something, he said. This wasn't about testing you. It wasn't about proving anything. I waited, sensing he was working towards something important. It was about giving you a gift, the gift of knowing your own power. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You've spent 15 years being my wife, being the woman you thought I needed. Tonight, you got to be yourself. The truth of it settled over me like warm water. He was right. In that stone chamber, surrounded by strangers, I hadn't been performing for anyone. I'd simply been present, open, alive to sensation and possibility. And what did you get out of it? I asked. Graham lifted his cup, holding the red liquid up to the light. I got to see you as you really are. Not as my wife, not as the woman who makes my coffee and pays our bills and worries about our retirement fund. I got to see Amelia. The way he said my name sent a shiver through me, as if he were tasting it for the first time. I love my wife, he continued, but I'm in love with Amelia. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. They're the same person. Now they are, he said. Now they finally are. 3 months later, I caught my reflection in our bathroom cabinet and smiled at the woman looking back. She had the same face, the same brown eyes, the same laugh lines around her mouth. But something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of her confidence. Graham appeared behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist as I brushed my teeth. In the glass, we looked like any long-married couple preparing for bed. But we carried secrets now, shared knowledge that had deepened rather than complicated our connection. No regrets? He asked, a question that had become our evening ritual. None, I said, rinsing my mouth. You? Only that we waited so long to be honest with each other. We talked extensively in the weeks following our mountain adventure, about boundaries and desires, about the difference between physical exploration and emotional betrayal. We'd agreed that some experiences were meant to remain singular, perfect in their isolation. But the woman who had emerged from that steam-filled chamber, she was here to stay. I turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting mint and possibility. 15 years of marriage, and we were still learning each other's depths. I love you, I said against his mouth. I love you too, he replied. All of you, finally. All of you. Outside our window, the ordinary world continued its predictable rotation. But inside our home, we had created something extraordinary. A marriage built on absolute honesty, on the recognition that love could expand to hold our most hidden selves. We had not broken. We had only grown deeper. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to our days. There was a tenderness between us now that hadn't existed before. Not the careful politeness of early marriage, but something earned through vulnerability. David would catch my eye across the dinner table and smile, a private acknowledgement of the territory we'd crossed together. I found myself watching him in quiet moments, reading the newspaper with his coffee, tying his shoes before work, humming unconsciously while he shaved. These ordinary gestures had taken on new weight. They were performed by a man who knew all of me and chose to stay. The guilt didn't disappear overnight. Some mornings I still woke with the familiar weight of shame pressing against my chest. But now David was there to witness it, to place a steady hand on my back and remind me that secrets lose their power when shared with someone who refuses to let them define you. "You're different," my sister mentioned during one of our weekly calls. Lighter somehow, I curled up in the reading chair by our bedroom window, watching David tend to his small herb garden below. "Am I?" "Yes. Like you've been holding your breath for years and finally remembered how to breathe properly." She wasn't wrong. The constant vigilance of keeping parts of myself hidden had been exhausting in ways I'd never fully recognized. Now, when David asked about my day or my thoughts, I could answer completely. The relief was profound. One evening, as we prepared for bed, David pulled a small wrap package from his dresser drawer. "I got you something." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple and elegant, but what made my throat tighten was the inscription on the inside. "All of you." "David," I started, but he shook his head. "I wanted you to have something to remind you," he said, fastening it around my wrist. "For the days when the old voices get loud again. You don't have to be perfect to be loved completely." I touched the warm metal against my skin, feeling the truth of his words settle into my bones. We made love that night with a new kind of intimacy, not the desperate urgency of confession, but the steady certainty of acceptance. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the dark, David traced lazy patterns on my shoulder. "Do you think we would have found our way here eventually?" I asked. "Without the crisis?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, "I don't know. Maybe, but I'm grateful we don't have to wonder." Outside, a late spring storm was building. Rain began to tap against our windows and lightning flickered in the distance. The weather seemed appropriate somehow, the kind of dramatic backdrop that marked important transitions. "What are you thinking about?" David murmured against my hair. I considered the question seriously. For the first time in years, my mind felt genuinely quiet. No secret compartments demanding attention, no careful editing of my thoughts before speaking them aloud. "Nothing," I said and meant it. "Absolutely nothing." He laughed softly. "Good." The storm moved closer, thunder rolling across the neighborhood. But we remained safe in our bed, in our home, in the marriage we had rebuilt with honesty as our foundation. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight we were exactly where we belonged. Together. Completely. Without reservation. The rain intensified, washing the world clean outside our window.